How's it going, everybody? Steve from Perfect Reload here, and it's been a while, and this is definitely a different type of video than what I have done in the past, but there's a game that I just can't get out of my head, and that's Immortality, the new game from Sam Barlow that came out recently. I started playing the game this past weekend, and it engulfed my entire Labor Day weekend. I really didn't expect to enjoy it as much as I did. Not saying that I haven't enjoyed what he's done in the past. I thought Her Story was fantastic, but it was a game that I played and really enjoyed, and, you know, I eventually played it again once I had kind of forgotten a lot of the particulars of the game, but it wasn't necessarily a game that stuck with me outside of like, oh yeah, that was a cool game if it came up in conversation. But something about Immortality has just, it's all I'm thinking about. You know, I was going to bed thinking about that game and waking up the next morning like, okay, I gotta play this game. And I stayed up till like 3 a.m. playing it and was up at 8 a.m. the next day picking more of it back up. I still haven't technically finished it. I have seen credits. I have seen most of all of the clips. I'm still in the process of still finding all of the different clips for the fictional movies within the game, which, you know, we'll get into, and that'll make a little bit more sense. But that's kind of where I'm at with the game. I checked, I have about 12 hours playtime in the game, and I got credits after about 8 hours, I think, something like that. So what exactly is the game? It is similar to Barlow's previous efforts, Telling Lies and Her Story, and the fact that you're watching footage and you're piecing together a larger story in a very non-linear format. I will say I did not play Telling Lies, so I can't speak to that game in particular, but I've played Her Story more than once, and definitely familiar with that game. But Immortality is quite different. It's far more interactive than Her Story was. Her Story really was just you typing keywords into a search bar, getting clips back that may be relevant to what you search for, and just over time piecing everything together in your head. There's no end point in the game. There is a part in the game where it says like, hey, if you feel satisfied, you could stop playing the game. If not, you can continue on. Immortality doesn't have an equivalent, although once you do hit credits, you can just go right back into the game and continue. You know, you can continue searching to uncover everything. I would say that it would be highly unlikely that you would not hit credits before piecing all the footage together. It actually might not even be possible. I think credits is probably triggered by you having watched certain scenes and probably a certain percentage of overall scenes. I certainly could be wrong there. Unfortunately, is not that I could find any behind the scenes footage of this game, like a making of. If any game needs a making of or like a Danny O'Dwyer no clip documentary, it is this game. I'm endlessly fascinated about how they made this game, and I hope someday we get to see some of that. So what exactly is the game? So the plot of the game is that there was an actress, Marissa Marcel, played by Manon Gage. I hope I'm pronouncing her first name correct. And she essentially made 3 movies in her career, none of which ever came out for various reasons. You have since found the footage of those movies, and you are going to piece it together to try and solve what happened, essentially. And you're not just getting filmed scenes. So you're getting what happened before the take and what happened after the take. There's also a few like Super 8 kind of camera stuff where you're seeing the cast and crew at a party hanging out. You see some audition tapes, things like that. And so you're getting more than just what happened in these movies, because a lot of the times some of the most interesting stuff in the game is stuff surrounding the movies being filmed, not necessarily the footage that you would have seen if these movies were completed and watched. You interact with them by scrubbing through the footage, rewinding, fast forwarding, and hitting play. If you're on mouse and keyboard, you use like your mouse wheel to scrub through. On Xbox, which is how I played it, you could use the triggers, you could use the thumbsticks. I thought the thumbsticks worked pretty well. And you pause, play, what have you. And then the gimmick, if there is one to the game, is a system called Match Cut, which is a misleading title. You're not exactly getting a 1-for-1 match, when you do this, but you can press a button. You can then interact with certain things that are on screen. It might be an actor's face. It might be a prop in the background, maybe the title slate for what scene it is at the beginning. A lot of stuff you can interact and click on. And if you interact with it, choose to click on it, it will then, zoom in and zoom back out, and you'll be in a different piece of footage. So if you're watching a scene with one of Marissa's characters in one of the fake films, and you zoom in on her face, you might then see a scene of her maybe making a similar facial expression, but it's a different one of these films. And eventually you really have to play it to kind of get it. It's a difficult system to describe. You really just do need to play it. And that's really it. There's not that much more to it. A lot of the story of the game and the experience of the game is taking place in your head because you are actively trying to piece this puzzle together. And it gets tricky because it's as non-linear can get. But it also, because of that, can create some really nice moments. There were times where, as I'm piecing together the plots for these 3 fictional movies, which are called Ambrosio, Minsky, and Two of Everything, where I was like, you know what? Ambrosio's kind of weak. Like, I don't really think this movie would be all that interesting. This section is just not really gripping me. I think maybe I'm going to go focus on trying to find some Minsky stuff. And then you would see a scene from Ambrosio and you're like, whoa. Like, this movie's got something totally else going on in it. And then you're just like immediately invested in Ambrosio for the next hour of your life. And that really kind of trickles throughout. Like, you would get hyper invested in, or at least I would get hyper invested in, like, oh man, I want to see what happens in Minsky. I really want to see what happens. And sometimes you're just thrown for a loop where you're just not getting footage. Those match cuts are bringing you somewhere else. And that's not necessarily a bad thing because ultimately you do need to piece everything together. And I really think that seeing pieces of the other films influences your viewpoint on other sections of the game. And again, like I said, very tricky to describe. It really is something you got to get your hands on. All right, so a basic overview out of the way. The rest of this is spoilers. I cannot give my full thoughts on this game without going into spoilers. So if you don't want to be spoiled, I'll give you Too Long Didn't Read. I think this game is amazing. That's what you're going to end up hearing from me if you watch this whole thing. I think the game's amazing. But if you're cool with spoilers, you've already finished the game, played enough of it where you don't feel like it's going to affect you, then, let's hang out and go for a ride because this game goes places. So the first thing I want to talk about are those mechanics of the game. I initially thought I was going to play this game with a mouse and keyboard because that's what seemed like would make the most sense. And I played about 15 minutes of it and had to stop what I was doing. And I was like, you know what? Out of curiosity, I'm going to pick it back up on my Xbox later because the cloud save, it'll sync. I could pick up where I left off. I would say that you really need to play this game with a controller. Vibration is a very key mechanic in the game. There are audio cues that go with that. But for me, at least, if I'm trying to pay attention to dialogue, I may subconsciously just be missing audio cues if I'm really focused on what somebody is saying, reading the subtitles and maybe trying to pay attention to something in the background. Whereas your controller vibrating, you could just feel it. It's going to kind of alert you like, hey, something is happening here. And like I said, full spoilers. So the vibration it triggers essentially the game within the game or the story within the story. And the moment that I realized what that was is one of the coolest moments I've ever experienced in a video game. There are a handful of times playing video games in my life where there are memories of that game of a particular section or a particular cutscene or gameplay portion that are just seared into my memory. And the one that I always go to is the beginning of Grand Theft Auto 4, where you're crossing the bridge for the first time and seeing a city like that, an open world city, for the first time. There really hadn't been a game up until that point that had done something like that to that degree, like that well crafted, the graphics at the time, the whole thing. Like looking at that going, oh my God, as I play through this game, I could go anywhere on that screen. When I found the first piece of subverted footage in this game, very similar feelings. It was a scene where two actors are laying down. The controller started vibrating, and I had noticed the controller vibrating a few times, but I hadn't figured out that, like, oh, the vibration means I need to do something with the controller. And so the controller's like really vibrating for, I don't know, like 15 seconds, 20 seconds maybe. And I'm like, I have to do something. So I start fast forwarding and it doesn't really do anything. And then I rewind and it doesn't do anything. And I was like, well, maybe I need to manipulate the speed in a way. So I start fast forwarding just slower and it's not doing anything. And then it happens. I start reversing the footage and I start seeing another scene of, I couldn't quite tell what it was at that time, superimposed on the screen. And I didn't know what to do with that. And so I'm just watching it. I'm rewinding it, fast forwarding it, rewinding it, fast forwarding it. And I'm just like, what the hell is this? Like, are these ghosts? Are we seeing like a ghost version of these characters? Is everybody dead? Is that why these movies didn't come out? They're all ghosts. And so this starts happening in a few more scenes as I'm going through and I'm just like, what the hell is going on with this? Like ghostly footage, like it's just so, there's got to be more to it. So I will admit I eventually caved and I went on the internet, and even as of right now, there's not that much information about this game. There are a lot of fan theories about what the story is, and I think a few people are probably spot on at this point. There's enough out there where people have really dug through this game and started to piece together things and really digging into it. But at that time, you know, just a few days ago, there really wasn't. I think like the Reddit for Immortality at the time had like maybe 20 posts. So I Googled controller vibrating Immortality game. Like, what do I do? And I finally saw somebody said, just rewind slower. And so I rewound slower and it clicked. And there's a little bit of an audible noise, but obviously like the scene switches and you are seeing something totally different with these other actors. And it's just like, what is this game? Like, what is happening in this game? And it's finding that other layer and then seeing what they do with it later on. Like, you can reverse footage, and then the footage that you get for reversing can then be fast forward to go to something else, which can then be reversed back to entirely something else. And it's just like, where does this game end? Like, what is this? Like, there are so many layers to everything. There are so many things to interact with. Like, make sure you click on every plant, every coffee mug, every ashtray, just everything and anything. I got some of the weirdest scenes by clicking on a pillow. Like, it's the level of detail and care that went into making this. It's one thing to like do the whole like fake movie within a movie. I always really like that. There are like movie like State and Maine, which is a movie about making a movie, which I always found really interesting. But they're doing 3 movies, and then there's even more stuff on top of that. And then there's this whole subverted plot line underneath it. And then there's even subplots of the subplot of the subverted people. And then the subverted people start interacting with the regular people. And I'm sitting there like 3:00 in the morning on a Saturday night, and I'm just like, my brain is fucking leaking out of my ear because like, what is this game in front of me? And I just could not get enough of it. I could not put it down. It's incredible. It really is. But the one negative I will say with the game are these mechanics. There were times where the rewind did not work and the subverted scene would not trigger no matter what I did. I would have to quit out of the game, go back into the game, find that scene again, try it again, get it to work. There's also times where rewinding it doesn't do it. You have to fast forward all the way to the end and then quick rewind back, and it'll snap and give you an alternate version of the scene. So there were times where it was very frustrating. There was one scene in particular that I spent a good half an hour on just trying to get the reverse footage to trigger, and it just was not doing it. So I think that maybe there are a few mechanical issues in there. The only other bug I saw in the game, and this happened a lot, is that scenes would start and there would be no sound. It would just be muted. You could get out of it pretty quick by either exiting the scene and going back in, or usually if I hit rewind or fast forward and then hit play, the sound would come back. But that happened a lot. I would say that probably 1 out of every 10 to 15 scenes that I would play would probably start with no sound. I don't think it ever happened when I was playing a sound from the main clip or playing a scene from the main scene selection. I think it was only happening when I was match cutting between scene. But it seems like people are aware of that. I've listened to a few podcasts where people are talking about the game and they're like, yeah, this happened to me. So it seems like it's pretty common. Once you realize what's happening, you can figure it out. But this game has so much going on that at first I thought it was like a thing where I was like, oh, maybe there's muted scenes now and I need to pick up on body language, or the subtitles are going to be weird or something like that. So it's like, even with a glitch or a bug, you're like, is this part of the game? Like you just don't know. So any FMV game like this is kind of going to ride or die on the quality of the actors, and especially a game like this where it's actors playing actors acting in movies. A lot of the reason why people like the FMV genre is kind of that tinge of cringiness, cheesiness, campiness, all that. And this game has none of that. Everything is played straight. I wasn't familiar with any of the actors in the game outside of Jocelyn Donahue, who was in The House of the Devil, which is a great movie from some years ago. But everybody plays their role great. There wasn't a single person in this game that I felt like their performance took me out. Everybody seemed game because they're asked to do some pretty wild stuff in this game. Nobody had a bad performance, really, at all. I would say that kind of like the 4 characters you're going to see the most of are Marissa Marcel, played by Manon Gage, John Durick, who is the director of photography for one of the movies, and then the director for 2 other films, which played by Hans Christopher, Carl Goodman, who's in Minsky, played by Ty Molbach, and then Robert Jones. The character Robert Jones is the character Miles Zanto plays him, and Ambrosio. Everybody performs really well. There's actually quite a large cast to this game because you're looking at 3 different movies, and those movies have a fleshed out cast, and you actually kind of get to know the characters more than you think you would, because there are, for the most part, background dressing to the larger mystery afoot and the more major characters, and really kind of everybody is playing second fiddle to the character of Marissa Marcel because this is a game about her. But I really have to single out Manon Gage's performance. She has, thankfully it's starting to populate, but when I had checked on either Friday night or Saturday night last week, she really didn't have any information about herself online. Her IMDb had maybe 1 or 2 credits, and I found a link to a Twitter and to an Instagram, and that was about it. I couldn't find any interviews with her. She doesn't seem to have done any films. And what I've been able to piece together is it seems like this might be her first thing out of college. Which, I mean, it's a hell of a debut and a hell of a project to tackle. I couldn't imagine doing that because she is certainly asked to do quite a bit in this game. She's playing the character of Marissa Marcel, then on top of it playing, 3 other characters, and each movie she does has a dual role in it. And so, I mean, it's a lot to take on. But thankfully, some information has kind of started to come out from her. It looks like she's, working on some projects right now and all that. But it seems to be, and I could be wrong, this might be her debut performance, which really kind of mimics that Marissa Marcel thing where you see her, she's auditioning and she gets her first film role in the fictional movie Ambrosio within the game. And so it's a little bit of life imitating art, although I certainly hope that the real actress doesn't, get possessed and, bad shit happens to her. She is absolutely just captivating in this game. And the closest thing that I can compare it to, and it's not quite the same because the actor I'm going to bring up had an established career before it, wasn't, this wasn't like a debut or anything, but her performance in this game feels so much like Anya Taylor-Joy's performance in Queen's Gambit. But I really feel like Manon Gage is like, she's coming out with both barrels in this game. Like, this is an incredible performance. You really can't take your eye off of her in each scene. She really just dominates every scene she's in. Like, she's just so sharp. The role Anya Taylor-Joy had in Queen's Gambit, the entire show, she was almost spent like stalking her prey like an animal, right? Like, you see her, she's very hunter-like with her approach to the game of chess. And that kind of bleeds over into her personal life, and, her life spirals out of control for a while and all that. And, if you haven't seen the show, go see the show. But I mean, that's really what it was. She had this very like stalkerish presence on that show. And with Manon Gage's performance as Marissa Marcel, you see this like sense of control in everything. And I think it really does play into, again, like I said, we're gonna have spoilers. She's like possessed by this like immortal being who could exert control over whatever they wanted to. They seem to be able to control time. And there's just this like subtle layer of never seeing this woman out of control. There are scenes, because in the fake film Minsky, I believe she has a producer credit on the film, so she's also making like high level decisions with the director. And in every scene, you don't really see her like hem and haw over a decision. There's one that springs to mind where Ty Mulback's character, Carl Goodman, says, "Should I take her by the hand? Is that something that I would do?" And she immediately goes, "Well, what if I take your hand and I'm the dominant one in this situation?" Like, you see her playing this woman who knows exactly what she wants. Would have to imagine that if the Game Awards does a best performance category, she is like the front runner, and they would be insane, honestly, to give anybody else that award this year. Like, this is... If this was a film and not a video game, her performance would be all over the front page of like AV Club and being discussed on, like the movie subreddit on Reddit and all that. It'd be one thing if it was her playing one character, but it's the fact that she could play multiple characters, the fact that any actor can play multiple characters and do it really well, because typically when you think of an actor playing multiple characters in a movie, a lot of the time it's comedies, right? Like, you see it for kind of jokes, and maybe there's like weird prosthetics, like they did with like the Nutty Professor or things like that. You don't see it too often in a more serious role. I know there's that Tom Hardy movie where he plays identical twins, and it does happen at times, but to see her, especially because I have to imagine as an actor, acting for a video game is probably different than acting for a play, than acting for television, than acting for film. And to have this be your first performance and you're playing multiple roles, I can just only imagine. But I mean, that is the draw of this game. The story is great. It really is. It's one of the best video game stories I've experienced in a very long time, but it's really her performance. And that's weird to say with a video game. You don't really think about that, where it's like, man, Uncharted's a great game, but man, Nolan North's performance is the reason to play Uncharted. I mean, Nolan North does an amazing job and he created an iconic character, but you're playing Uncharted because the gameplay is great. But for Immortality, where the gameplay is kind of scrubbing through footage and clicking on things here and there, you're not really coming to the game for that. You're coming to the game for the story, and that story is being presented via the talents of the actors on screen, because it's FMV. These aren't characters that are animated and you're worried about making sure that facial expressions look right and things like that. There's real footage of real people. And that's the draw of the game, is that Sam Barlow put together just a murderer's row of what appears to be very hungry actors willing to commit fully to this batshit fucking game that is asking them to do some wild stuff on camera. And everybody is just game for it, and everybody brings it. There's, like I said, not a bad performance across the board. Absolutely incredible. All right, so I have rambled on and on enough. I will give my kind of final thoughts on this. Immortality is 100% the best thing I have played this year. I will say that this is probably the best game that I have played in close to a decade. And when I really start to reflect on it in 6 months to a year after I'm done playing it, because I don't think this is a game I would play again, at least not anytime soon. It'd be years. It was years in between me playing Her Story because it was just, the story was too fresh. I knew what it was and it wasn't fun to discover anything anymore. This may end up being one of my favorite games of all time. I mean, it's rare these days that a game really gets its hooks in me. If you were to ask me what are my favorite games of all time, most are a decade plus old, and some of which are more than 20 years old because they were games, that I played in the 90s when I was growing up. Because those are the games that stick with you. It's hard for me to connect that deeply with a modern game, and I have certainly connected with Immortality. It's a very unique game. And I really want to see what Sam Barlow does next. I really want to see what Manon Gage does next. I really like that we're taking a genre that historically has been labeled as sort of the bastard child of video game genres and breathing new life into it and doing new and exciting things with it. This is a unique one-of-one game, and I cannot say enough good things about it. I get that this was a video of 20 plus minutes of me just like blowing smoke up everybody's ass that was involved with this game, but I don't know. It's just something about it where it was just, I just wanted to talk about this game. I just wanted to get these thoughts out there. It's just, I don't know. It's just really, really incredible game. It is a masterpiece of its genre. I hope that the game finds a ton of success because it is a very niche of a niche, game to play. I think being on Game Pass is really helpful. I was planning on picking it up regardless, but I think having it on Game Pass is going to open it up to a lot of players that may have never played a game like this before, and maybe they ultimately don't like it and they just don't stick with it. And there might be people that don't like it but end up watching a full playthrough online and experiencing it that way and watching it almost like the movie, the movies that are within it. I'd really like to see them make Minsky as an actual movie. Even if they just kind of get the cast back together and do like a very truncated, maybe 30-minute version of Minsky, I would really, really like to see them make that movie. That is it's a cool plot for a movie, and but they would have to do it with these actors. You couldn't recast it. You got to stick with the people in this game because I think that they are the right choices. But yeah, so that's going to wrap it up. Thanks for listening to me just ramble on and on about this amazing game. It's September at this point. There's still a few more games that I'm going to play coming out this year, but I can't imagine that this game is not my game of the year. It's unbelievable. 10 out of 10. Classic. Instant classic. Yeah, that's it. I'll see you again real soon. Take it easy.